am ready.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Eve, and I am joined today by Siouxsie Q. Siouxsie is our Elevate community partner for October 2024. And I am really, really excited to speak with you today, Siouxsie. I feel like anytime there's ever been anything that has come up where there was a voice needed to represent the adult industry and sex workers, you were always there to answer the call. So it's really just an honor to have you here today. So thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. It's an honor to be here. I am so happy that this exists and that I also get to be a part of it. Thank you so much.
Yay, thank you. Okay, so we're really just going to take this time to learn a little bit more about you, your background, and also the work that you do, particularly in advocacy. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your upbringing and what was young Siouxsie like?
I love this question because I think about this a lot, right? Because not everyone is as involved in advocacy or spends as much time in thinking about politics, talking about politics, than I realize I do in my personal life and like in my family. And that's been true the whole time. You know, one of my earliest memories is making a cardboard peace sign and coloring it in stars and stripes and like the red, white, and blue flag to put in our window when we lived in Klamath Falls, Oregon, to protest the Gulf War. Yes, I am that old.
Oh, okay.
I was
This is
thinking,
like
I
the
was like,
90s,
this is
right?
the 90s. Yes,
Yeah.
like early 90s. I was remembering, I'm like, yeah, the Iraq War. I'm like, nope, the Gulf War, little bit longer, a little bit further back in time. But it's always been like that. My mother is an activist. My grandfather was an activist in our tribal community. I mean, I'm a Modoc woman, right? And the Modoc people were the last. They fought the last war against the American government, and so it's literally just in my blood to dissent and to critique and to try to fight for the survival of people who are living, you know, within this American empire, for better or for worse, right? And my dad is also a like union guy, and so labor activism, workers' rights, the LGBTQ community, it was all a part of my life the whole time. It's not something I came to like in adulthood. So yeah, I organized the first gay straight alliance at my high school back in like 2000 or something. So yeah, it's always young Siouxsie was very much like now Siouxsie.
So these were, I mean, and you really think about when you're growing up, like you hear these conversations that your parents have around the kitchen table or just, while they think you're doing your homework or something, you're actually really listening. So it sounds like you were really surrounded by really strong people.
Absolutely. And in this like current day and age, my parents are blessedly still alive and we're very close. We talk all the time. And it's just such a relief to have people I can turn to and feel like we're on the same page. I do have in-laws that have very differing political opinions than me and my birth family. So I'm so grateful every time I can call mom and Abba and be like, can you believe what's happening? And they're like, no, I can't. And we have a shared value. I know everyone doesn't have that privilege, and I'm really blessed that I do.
Oh my gosh, especially these days, which we'll get to a little bit later, but it's great to
Indeed.
have that kind of support and to be able to, yeah, just really just talk about things. I think that's like kind of the hardest thing these days is really just being able to just talk things through. So remembering, back to your childhood, your teen years, what do you remember being really, really good at?
Oh, I've always been really good at public speaking. I'm a loud mouth by nature. And also, you know, what I primarily do for work these days within the industry is I produce and direct. And so while I love being like the star and the center of attention and like getting the adults to like sit down and have a play, I produce the play. And maybe, you know, Mindy next door needs to be our star because she's got what it takes. You know, I've always been that sort of organizer, in addition to performing, which I just love. I've always been the one who can like make it happen and get everybody on stage or wherever to the protest or to the meeting and make it happen.
Yeah, that's a natural gift, actually. I don't know if that's, I mean, I'm sure it's something that can be learned, but if you have those natural inclinations to organize and to get people together, that's a really, really powerful skill.
Thank you.
Asking.
I'm very grateful. Yeah, I come from like a theater background as well. So my mom was a professional stage manager, and the stage manager is responsible for getting everybody to the stage, to call time, the curtains up, the lights on. And so I had a lot of it modeled growing up.
Yeah, yeah. So, what would you say then was something that was instilled in you by your family members, your caregivers growing up?
Well, I think that I say this a lot, and I think it is. I don't like to think in black and white, but I think there is a little bit of a binary in this world that there are the type of people who care about people and the type of people who don't care about people. And
Mhm.
that comes down to a lot, it becomes very apparent what is at play in policies and in legislation. And, it comes from a place of either community care or not. And I think I was really brought up in a space of community care, and that, we are only as fortunate as those who are less fortunate, and if we have more, we share that sort of community driven situation. Like I had a good friend growing up, and my dad found out that like her parents didn't pack her a lunch for school. She was already kind of like working in the field, and he was like, "No, that's not going to work. So you're going to have two lunches in your bag, and the other one's going to go to Becky."
Mhm.
If you needed a place to stay, my house was the place you could stay at no matter what you were going through. And so that continues to be like how I live my life. I'm not planning to have kids of my own, but that community, maternal, like, empathetic stuff is just was a part of how I was raised and what I hope to like be continuing to bring into the world.
Yeah, that's so amazing that that's great that your parents even taught you to be aware of that and brought that part out of you when you were so young. And I'm only really finding this out now myself. I do have kids, but it's like we have to consciously teach them to be aware of, like, to look outside of ourselves,
Totally.
like, to be able to look out for others. So that's amazing. It sounds like you have really amazing parents.
I do. I love them so much. We've had our differences. I was kind of a hellion as a teenager, and we butt heads where, and it's always, I think, a challenge when you have someone in your family who is in the adult industry, especially as front facing as I am. I mean, like I had a column in the San Francisco Weekly for like 4 years, and that was in print on every street corner with my little face on it, said the whore next door. And like my aunt worked at UCSF during that time. Like her colleagues were reading that paper. And so sometimes it can be really difficult for families. And I want to offer compassion for folks who are sort of by proxy adjacent to the industry because someone they love works within it. And maybe you get the good parts of the industry, maybe you get some of that extra income or access to things, but more often than not, you're mostly getting the bad parts of the industry, which is the stigma, which is people's judgments, which is the limited access based on those, judgments and such. So we've had our moments, but by and large, like my family is so supportive and I'm really grateful for them.
Yeah, that's a gift. That's a gift, especially in our industry. Um, so who made the biggest impression on you when you were younger?
Ooh. Um, the first person that comes to mind, honestly, is one of my mentors who has since passed. Marcia Hovick was her name. And she was my like drama teacher from when I was about 8 years old until I was a little bit of a teenager. And then I ended up coming back after college with my theater degree to work underneath her as she was like 80, becoming very aged, and the like theater facility and educational space that she had created, she needed to be reallocated as she was getting up in years. And she was just this beautiful woman with a loud voice who could command an audience, who was very passionate and unapologetic about right and wrong and good and bad. And, but also incredibly nurturing. It's like her voice could take up a room and like make you freeze, and do whatever. But you could come to Marcia as you were, and like it was a safe space. So shout out to Miss Marcia Hovick. She definitely
Oh.
the loudmouth that I am in many ways.
She embraced that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other piece is, the theater is really a place where you can come as you are. So I remember when I was older working with Marcia, and I had students of my own, we're doing a production of, I think it was Rapunzel or something. And, the parents come, they see the kids do their thing. And one of the parents takes me aside and is like, wow, we did not realize that our son had overcome his stutter. And I was like, I did not know your son had a stutter, my friends, you know? And there were so lots of kids with autism, like differing abilities, LGBTQ kids would come through these doors, both when I was a student and when I was a teacher. And it's really a space, Marsha created a space where you would just meet people where they were at. No matter what your ability was, you were invited to come on the stage, learn what you could, and shine. And so
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful to hear. Because I think when you think of theater kids, it can also be daunting if maybe you're not familiar with that space. You might just think, oh, everyone is just very audacious and outgoing, and you have to be a certain way in order to participate. But it sounds like that was a very inclusive space that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what I really try to foster in the spaces that I create as a professional now. You know, like the
Yeah.
sex working community takes a lot of, is so diverse. And, you know, I think it's wrong to talk about sex work and leave disability politics out of the equation. So many people choose this industry because of the limitations that capitalism allows for different abilities. So that was, it's an intersectional conversation that I was having even long before I entered this part of the entertainment industry. But I think it's just so important that we meet people where they're at.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that because yeah, those things are not taught, you're not necessarily educated coming into especially the adult space. And I think it's something that you tend to find out as you go, as you interact with more people and build relationships. So that's really cool that you recognize that even well before you entered the adult industry, and that you were already putting that into practice as far as creating inclusive spaces. That's awesome.
For sure, for sure.
Okay, so let's move into a little bit more about your work. Particularly, let's start with sex work. So under what circumstances did you enter sex work and around when?
So it was right after, so let's see, I got my degree, my Bachelor of Arts degree in like 2008, right as the financial collapse happened of
Ah,
2008. And I started dancing at the historic, late great unionized worker owned peep show called the Lusty Lady, which was the only one of its kind. And I started in about 2009 because I moved to San Francisco and I was going on tour pretty regularly with bands. I was tour managing and also performing my own like ukulele mermaid act situation, and just really living the dream of the independent artists. And this was pre Patreon. This was pre a lot of the direct to consumer platforms that we have now that were pioneered by the adult industry. Let's just be very clear about that, but are now available to artists. It was not, oh, let me just put my song on Spotify. That was barely started.
yeah.
So I was working these like retail jobs, and then I would basically like quit every 8 months or whatever when it was time to go on tour again. And someone suggested I check out the Lusty. I got hired, despite my like deeply embarrassing musical theater inspired audition. Ask that happened, but they hired me anyway. And during orientation, they were like, "Hey, just so y'all know, there's a leave of absence policy. You can take a leave of absence like up to 9 months." And I was like, "Is there like is there a reason? Because it have to be like family or health related?" And they're like, "No, you could literally just go on tour with your band or just like want to take a break or whatever." And that idea that you could be a person first and that your job would support you, and that the idea that this was like everybody in the room understood that the job supported the person, not
Mhm.
the other way around. And I was like, oh, this is the space for me. And that I had done a little bit of sex work here and there, like in college, done a couple like amateur porns and things like that. But that really got me on the track. And of course, because the Lusty Lady was worker owned, I quickly
Mhm.
like got involved in the organization of it, was on the board of directors as a theater coordinator, and just like that really instilled, I think, both the organizing component and like the business acumen that I now have, because I was an owner, I was a part owner of this cooperation. And so that's really when my journey truly began, was at the Lusty.
Wow. So that's definitely the exception, I feel like. We hear all these stories about clubs and yeah, that definitely stands out as more of the exception
Oh,
than
100%. There was no place like the Lusty. And I closed in 2013, and it
Mhm.
so missed. I hope that we see something like it in the future because it was a really magical time.
Yeah. Do you still keep in touch with anyone from that
Oh,
time?
absolutely. My mother, if you will, my like drag stripper mom, Princess Pandora Noir is what she goes by now. She is now a sister of Perpetual Indulgence, which is the like drag nuns civic organization in San Francisco and all over the country. She goes by Sister Bubbles Bathory, and we talk all the time. She was at my wedding a couple of years ago. Also, one of the first friends I made there is now completely out of the industry. She has 2 kids, but we're like Instagram buddies. I literally like we
Yeah.
DM all day, like look what Marlo did, just so yeah, those bonds are for life for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing to hear because I used to dance back in the day as well, but I feel like I never got like the name. This was pre-Instagram
Right.
and all of that, so I didn't really get to keep in touch with those people. But it sounds like the level of the bond that
Yeah.
you created within that space, it's just on a whole other level. So of course, you're kind of bonded for life.
There are plenty of people that like, because it was a little bit pre-internet as well, like I'll never see those girls again. They don't exist on the internet. I don't know
Yeah.
their legal names. There's that heartbreak of like never seeing that
Yeah.
stripper again is so sad.
They're just out in the ethers somewhere floating in space. I don't they're
Totally.
out there. Shout out to all of the people that we worked in a club with and if you made a positive impact on our lives. So okay, so you started in dancing and then what happened after that? After you left, after the club closed and everything, what happened?
So I wasn't there like at closing. I didn't leave.
Okay.
I moved on from the Lusty before it, ultimately met its demise. So I started doing more porn, like both like queer porn and feminist porn was really having a moment in San Francisco and in that time period. And then Kink.com had the San Francisco Armory, which was this like Moorish castle that took up an entire city block that this BDSM porn company bought and was it was a wild time to both webcam. I was a original Kink Live girl where we had shifts. We
Wow.
would clock in and clock out, and there were these
Yeah.
elaborate sets we could play with. It was, and so I started shooting, webcamming and then shooting scenes with them around that time period, like 2012 into 2014. That's where I met my now husband, Michael Vegas. And from there, I really started to get into activism a little bit. I mean, I knew I started a podcast called the Whorecast, uh, primarily around this piece of legislation. I believe Prop 35 is what it was called. This is 2012, so I'm really reaching here. But that was the piece of legislation in California that expanded the definition of human trafficking to include what we like a lot of consensual sex work. Basically, anybody who profits off of someone's sexual labor, i.e., if I pay my mom's rent next month, then she under this legislation would be my trafficker. And
Mm,
so really undermining the community bonds that sex workers have to survive and help their communities survive. And I was like, no, 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 no. So even though it passed by a landslide, that got me in to that space and
yeah.
speaking with human trafficking orgs and survivors and trying to just like build a bond to have this conversation that wouldn't further marginalize these groups that are already super marginalized. So that's when
Yeah.
that started, and then that eventually got me to LA.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that also I didn't realize we had previously partnered with Ray Threat, whom I believe you probably know, but it sounds like just with the stories that Ray has spoken about and that you are also talking about, that San Francisco was kind of this, it was beyond a scene. Like there were these legendary things that have actually happened for the adult industry in particular. It was like a whole movement. So, but when I mean, I feel like when we think of adult, especially, it's so synonymous with LA, but that wasn't always necessarily the case.
Yeah,
So, yeah, is it still the same in San Francisco now? I mean, I think the Kink Armory closed, right?
that's
So,
gone. That's
yeah.
gone. But yeah, it was definitely like a moment when the Armory was there, Crash Pad series with Shine Louise. I believe Madison Young was shooting for like Philly Films and other like sort of sneaking feminist and queer content into these like mainstream spaces. It was really a
Mm.
vibe. The Lexington, which is the one of the it was a popping dyke bar at the time. It's now since closed and it's like a bougie wine bar owned by Gavin Newsom. I think like but that's always San Francisco. You talk to someone who lived in San Francisco in the 80s and they'll say the exact same thing with different proper nouns,
Yeah, yeah.
But it was a moment in especially like the early internet sex work right before pre OnlyFans and things like that. I remember shooting with Courtney Trouble for Queer Porn TV, and she had a website and she had this studio space. And I remember I shot with her and I like cornered her right before the shoot and was like, how do you do it? How do you have your own website? Because Model Centro didn't exist. This plug
Oh, yeah.
model, she was,
Uh-huh.
and folks like her, Shine Louise and Courtney, and have to shout out Penny Barber and like the clip queens. Um, it was early. That
Yeah.
knowledge was not widely available. You really had to like dig and find your own payment processor and get a CC bill account and all the
Yeah,
heavy lifting.
that's amazing because that was such a big deal if you had your own website, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So did Courtney eventually share those resources and you were able to create your own?
It wasn't really my priority at the time,
Okay.
but I wanted to know. There were people around me doing it, and I knew that was like knowledge that was out there that I wanted to attain, but it wasn't like that was the goal. Plenty of people did
Yeah.
that. I think James Darling had FTM Fucker for a while, and my buddy Sam Solo started girlbullies.com at the time, and that's like gone on to do things. So people around me were like starting that process, but that was not my number one thing. I love porn, don't get me wrong, but being a webmaster to my own porn site is not the main thing that I want to do in this world. It's great, but
Yeah, true. And plus, yeah, those things were just not accessible. I feel
no.
like, I mean, you really had to go out there to find the people and have the funding to make it happen and the time. And yeah, so I get that. Okay. All
Props to all those
right.
people who were doing that. It was awesome.
Right. And shout out to people who made it accessible and really evolved that, to be able to, for people to have their own online presence. So okay. Well, looking back then, what have you learned from your experiences in sex work and the adult industry?
Oh my gosh, so much. I'm really glad I went to college, but I think that I've definitely learned more, like being a stripper and a full service sex worker and a porn performer, about people, about my body, about sexuality, about business. I feel like really being part of the sex industry and being a sex worker myself was a crash course in business because it's such a lean business model. Like it's me, I'm the product and the marketing and it's very taxing to be able to do all those things, but there is something just very instructive and I almost want to say like guttural, and you don't have to worry about like, oh, do I get a prototype from China and what does my like marketing budget look like. It's all pared down to like post an ad, find your customer, deliver, repeat.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
those are like, that's the sandwich that makes business go. And so once you understand that at like a core level, you can do all the other big stuff. But when I watch Shark Tank, for example, it's the same thing, right? No matter if it's a scrub daddy or a stripper, we're all doing business via the same functions, right? We're advertising, we're getting our leads, we're closing those sales. So God bless.
Wow. I feel like I've never heard scrub daddy and stripper used in the same analogy before, but that's okay. Yeah, no, that tracks.
Yeah. Not to mention just like people's humanity. Like I've done a lot of full service in-person sex work, and
Mhm.
whether it's in the club or massage or whatever, and just those are people's most like intimate moments. You're functioning in the way that like a doctor or a therapist functions. There's confidentiality, there's vulnerability. People show you parts of themselves that they don't show anyone else, and there's like a magic and a responsibility there, I think. And seeing that window into the human soul, that's has taught me more than all of the like literature I read in my, college English courses. Like, so sorry, Yeats. So sorry, Shelley. I've learned more about humanity in the champagne room.
Yeah. Well, and can you elaborate a little bit more about your time, especially in full service sex work? Because I feel, were you a very young adult whenever you entered into that space? And what was that like interacting with those clients too?
I was not that young, honestly. I entered the sex industry like 25-ish, 26.
Okay.
So I was in the latter part of my 20s.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that it's a very interesting demographic of people that you come across. Very diverse, right? Especially when I was working at the Lusty, which I do, even though there was a screen between us, right? I was still interacting with the public, people coming in off the street to be like, hello, these are my fetishes. And that's like wild. That's an absolutely wild job. And I really loved it, like, to be frank. But yeah, so I was seeing people like elder Chinese immigrants who were working construction in like Chinatown up the way, or like financial guys coming up from Montgomery Street with like dildos in their briefcase. So there was that. And then coming to LA and interacting with people who are like lonely entertainment executives who really just want someone to hear them and like have their rapt attention. And people come to sex workers for all of these reasons. And getting to see that slice of life has just like given me so much more insight into like who people are, just like as a cross section of humanity. I've seen all different types of people who come to me for all different types of reasons, and it's really, I think, increased my compassion for humanity as a whole. Like, overall, it's
Yeah.
not, I think people really stigmatize the client, the porn consumer, but they're just people getting their needs met in the way that you would go to a doctor, you would go to a therapist, or you'd go to a priest. People need people, and that's what the sex industry provides.
Amazing, amazing. And in such vulnerable moments, as you said. Yeah. Um, okay, so given how accessible everything is, particularly in the online adult space, so especially, with OnlyFans and all of these various platforms, you can easily just sign up and verify your age and, within a few clicks, there you go, you have an account and you can start working. So, do you have any advice, or is there anything that the incoming generation of sex workers should be aware of?
I think that because your digital footprint, when you like, I had sort of a little adopted sister in my life who is now in the adult industry, but we were hanging out via the music scene when we were teenagers, and she's a little bit younger than me. So when she went off to college and I was doing porn and I had done all the things at this point, she was like, hey, I really want to do queer porn with my friends. And I told her, I was like, absolutely not. Like, you can go work in a strip club and see if you like it. You can go do some like no face feet pictures or something of the like, and figure out if you like the sex industry before your face and likeness is on the internet forever as a sex worker. Like, I love the word whore, so I say this with like love in my heart, and something that I've chosen. But unless you are ready to be a whore forever, do not do sex on the internet.
Hmm.
Unless you are 100% ready to have that scarlet letter, Hester Prynne life till you die, don't don't do it. And I remember when I made the choice to do online porn, and this was before Siouxsie Q. This was very like early, and I was still in college at this point. Everyone in my hometown immediately found out, including my mother. One like 2 weeks. Hello, what the hell? Crisis.
Really? Wow.
You
Okay.
know, so it will happen. The person you don't want to see it will be the first person to see it.
Mhm.
And then I had to deal with the consequences, and there were hurt feelings and there was stigma and I thought to myself, I'm like, well, I have two choices here. I can be ashamed of this and I can try to run away from it, or I can change this part of the world and like be a whore forever and try to make it a little bit better for the next generation who so hopefully they won't have to deal with what I just dealt with. That was dumb, but I can't take it back. So we have to move forward. And so, like, unless you're ready to make that call and be like, okay, I'm going to attack sex worker stigma because it's going to be attacking me for the rest of my life,
Mhm.
just don't,
Yeah.
you
Because I
know?
think that, yeah, and I've seen this, kind of tossed around that, you can strategically do these things to protect your identity. But I think what people also fail to say sometimes is it's not, there's no foolproof way
Yeah,
to really ensure that you won't be found out by your friends, family, community, et cetera, especially if you don't want that.
yeah.
So,
Especially how online things are these days, because like things
yeah.
like the strip club, the pre-internet strip club, or what my little sister friend ended up doing was working in Australia in the legal brothel system. But even that, those legal brothels are like posting in the ads trying to get leads,
Yeah.
so the internet is everywhere, and so it's really, really hard to do it and not have it on you for forever. And I love it. I love this industry. I think I would have chosen it regardless of anything. But that's not true for everyone. And so someone who wants to do sex work, it's not easy money, but it's quick money. So
Mhm.
don't confuse the two. You can get money quickly, but it won't be easy. And the ramifications of how it might limit the money you make in the future. If you want to go be a doctor, if you want to go be a pediatrician, you want to go be a teacher, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where you will not be punished for doing sex work.
Mhm. And
So,
that's the hard reality of it.
yeah.
In your opinion, I don't want to sound ageist or anything like that, but I mean, I was 18 years old whenever I entered this space, and you're not necessarily always making informed choices. So do you think that maybe age and when you enter the adult industry or sex work, um, is there like an ideal time where you might be more mature to make certain choices or those types of choices?
I don't know, because I think that the world that I've fought for, I think as like a feminist and third and fourth wave feminist, is this where women, like femme people who are young, who are 18, 19, 20, are still experiencing the brunt of like sex worker stigma, even if they're not doing it. Like the misogyny, one of the reasons I entered the industry is because as a young woman, I was like, wow, I'm literally going to be treated like a whore no matter what industry I choose. I will be victimized by misogyny no matter what. So
Mhm.
I might as well leverage it. I might as well get paid. I might as well use, the Princess Leia vibes of using the chains of your oppressor to strangle Jabba the Hutt and escape.
Uh-huh.
Was my understanding. And so, like, there's a part of me that really loves that we now live in a world where 18, 19-year-old girls can be the top earners because they are getting that shit. So they may as well get their coin about it. So it's like, I believe in a world where a girl can monetize immediately, like can monetize her youth and her beauty, because in the other world, she just is punished for it. It doesn't get her places. It demeans her. And so that's a hard question to answer, because what I want, the world I want to see is where a girl can start an OnlyFans account if she wants to, when she becomes of age, get her money and have that never affect her life once she decides to move on from it.
Mhm.
That's the world I want.
Yeah. A lot of things would have to, an awakening might have to happen, but
Yeah. I
yeah.
think we're getting close, though. We are
I
getting
think
close.
we're moving in that direction too. Yeah, I don't want to sound like doom and gloom about it.
No, Beyonce said OnlyFans. She said our name. And
Right.
it's all uphill from here, I feel like. It's going to get better.
So, okay, so I want to get your opinion on this statement.
Yeah.
Sex workers play an essential role in the fabric of society. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, yes, yes. Have been, will be historically. So much of like our movement building as in this world has been funded by sex workers. The town of Seattle, where I believe you are situated,
Yes.
basically would not exist without sex workers. Like sex workers built that town, you know, and that's true of almost every city in America. So, and that continues to be true. It's like, why am I here? Why are we talking? Because I have used sex work to fund the activism that I want to see in the world. Um, so that's one of the truer statements. And I wish, you know, I started a history project with my dear friend Sovereign Sire several years ago, and it's now hosted by her and Ella Darling, called Ill Repute, which is about, we've wanted to look at sex workers throughout history, but the line between sex worker and not sex worker is very murky before women could own property, which was like barely 100 years ago. So really looking at this cross section of people who have built not only the United States, but throughout the fabric of history, a lot of them are adjacent to sex work, you know, movers and shakers. So yes, 100% agree.
That's just the history they don't teach you in school.
And like, why? It's a lot of history to leave out. It's a lot of history to leave out. So I'm very glad those projects exist, and hope to see more of them. And yeah, I think like moving forward, we will continue to see that, especially in like the OnlyFans and, you know, web economy, where sex workers earning potential has, you know, just grown exponentially. Like we will, we're starting to see more and more people in politics. Like, how are we going to see the next wave of sex workers who are running for office? Like, that's coming for sure. So here we go.
Maybe sitting right here, who knows?
We'll see. We'll see. Citizens United's got to go first. Yes.
So, you have served in several key roles when it comes to grassroots initiatives, committees, and coalitions that work on behalf of sex workers and the adult industry. Just to name a few, you were the former secretary of APAC, the former director of policy and industry relations for the Free Speech Coalition, director of media for PASS, and you were also heavily involved in Cal Prop 60 and FOSTA SETSTA, representing the adult industry members. So, what prompted you to get into activism? We know that your history and
Right.
your parents were very strong, forces and influential in that regard. But what prompted you?
So it was the Prop 35 thing, like had me inspired me to start the Whorecast podcast project, and I did that as sort of an organizing project. It wasn't really a podcast; it was more of like a sex worker propaganda machine. If I'm being completely honest, like I really wanted to craft that narrative of sex work as a path to the American dream through the voices of my community, and I really feel like we did that. And eventually, I was tapped. By the Free Speech Coalition, right as we were gearing up for the No Prop 60 campaign. And that really hurled me sort of that ushered in the sort of like chapter of nonprofit and activism that I did, where I was really doing just a little bit of sex work, but primarily I was in these roles. And so yeah, that the idea that the adult industry, which I had, the adult industry, specifically porn in California, could be just gone away. And I'd figured out at that point, I had tried all of the sex work. Porn's my favorite. It just is.
Mhm.
I love making the movies. I love a little dash of Hollywood. I love the like athleticism of it, both as a performer and as like the pit crew. You're just like helping people do these incredible feats of extraordinary labor. But so that the possibility of that just going away, I was like, oh no, we got to get in there. And I was offered this director of policy position that was sort of an ad hoc. The campaign was my baby. I was working on that, you know, putting in 10-12 hour days. And then seeing, because we won that fight, we managed to block the proposition. We won by over 1 million votes, even though we were outspent 10-1.
Mhm.
I go to bed at night saying those words, like over 1 million votes, outspent 10-1, because like that is a David and Goliath story. And I think that, you know, obviously the outcome of the 2016 election, that was not the headline that like porn stars had changed the world. That's not what people were saying the next day. They were saying lots
Right.
of things. But I took real notice of that. I took real heart in that. And I was like, it's all different now. We
Mhm.
know that sex workers can change the course of history. We've always known that. But when it comes to electoral politics, we know that sex workers are a voting bloc that is currently untapped. And that's when I sort of went all in on just the idea of galvanizing the support of our community to affect change in the world. Two key moments that I remember in that chapter was pre 20 like the 2016 election. It was October of 2016. We had like 200 porn performers and their allies gather in the streets of Hollywood and protest and, raise the alarm about this piece of legislation that we were going to be found so harmful. And then at the same time, we had people on the internet. We had a bunch of sites sort of block access so that when people would go onto the site that day, it would be like, hey, in case you don't vote this way, your porn might be leaving. So it was this multi-level action, and seeing all of the, calling all of the forces, together to fight. It's giving the end of Lord of the Rings. It's giving Captain Planet. It's giving the warriors gathering to listen to Cyrus. And I freaking love that. And then the same thing when we did the lobbying day against Sesta Fosta. There was a huge group of sex workers that again came together in Hollywood and walked through the streets and to raise awareness about these rights. And then also we had little groups going to, as constituents, going to their specific representatives and being like, hello, I did not like the way you voted. I would like you to vote differently. Jessica Drake would too. Yeah, look at her. She didn't like the way you voted. That's using our power on all of these fronts is so cool.
How did you know? Okay, this sounds like a stupid question, kind of. Like, how did you know what to do, or how did you know? Like, just did you have mentorship, or did you just naturally were you brainstorming as a group and like this makes sense? Like, let's do this. How did that whole process? What did that process look like with each of the initiatives?
So that's like another, the final product is this very flashy, exciting thing, but the to get there is a lot of people in rooms, a lot of very contentious Zoom meetings. Coalition building is messy and it's hard, and it involves people with money and it involves people with differing political opinions, especially when you come together on like a proposition. That's not a like partisan thing. I was at the California GOP conference and I was at the California Dem conference, like back to back, say with the same talking points. And so you're having people in these rooms that may disagree on everything else except this one issue, but you find a common ground and you come together. So yeah, I definitely had mentorship. Mike Stabile, I cannot say enough about
Mike. Free Speech Coalition.
He's the best. He's the actual best. I have turned to him in times of crisis and just like, I actually worked for him for a little bit in between like the Free Speech Coalition and when I went on to do ACLU, I was, helping him, Mike Stabile, the little staff member at Polari Media. And then Kelly Holland, of course, who used to own Penthouse and is a disruptive propaganda lady. She's been in the world of activism. When you go to Kelly's house, you see the photojournalism, photos she took in the 70s of like child soldiers and uprisings. And she gets it on a level. And so I've had incredible mentorship there. And they've also seen several seasons in the adult industry. But we also had, I can't remember the names of the people, nor am I sure if I would be able to say them publicly, but we had political consultants that were hired. Jeffrey Douglas, of course, who is the chair of the board, or I believe he was at the time, Free Speech Coalition. Jeffrey Douglas went up to the Supreme Court. Like his name is on that historic decision that allows us to like make all of the porn that we currently make today. So I'm very blessed and I love listening to people who, have the knowledge, and if they want to share it, like I will sit forever. I've always been a nerd about like elders and stuff. I come from a Native community, and so it's just like everything is about the elders and understand getting as much wisdom as you can from them.
Yeah. How exactly, if I can delve a little deeper, then how do you find like political consultants? Like how do you find these people that can help you to further your efforts? Particularly when it comes to like these campaigns.
Well, I think it's really about thinking about what's the word that we impacted communities. So like you look at a certain, so Prop 60, for example, not only was that a sex worker situation, that was an issue around like that faced the LGBTQ communities, HIV communities. And so we had this strong coalition of people who were going to be impacted. Republicans were not interested in it because it created this private right of action that's very against, how Republicans see small government. And like, this was a huge overreach. And so someone who had no stake in the adult industry, but has a stake in like how the government is, reaching into people's private lives. So
Yeah.
it's just about looking who's going to be impacted and calling in and building relationships with all of those communities. So when I worked with the ACLU, I had a position there as a community organizer in the LGBTQ space. And we were working on a campaign called Check the Sheriff, which was all about trying to get a new sheriff, which we eventually did, but really calling in critique of Sheriff Villanueva, who was really acting out of pocket in a variety of ways that were affecting a variety of communities. So we had Black Lives Matter LA, we had the survivor coalitions from, domestic violence organizations, anyone who was, we had sex workers, we had LGBTQ communities. And that's really where it comes from. It's not like it's grassroots organizing. It's not about one person. And I had to learn this, especially as like someone who accesses as much white privilege as I do, coming in with my little ACLU hat. Like, that was not my space to be like, okay, everyone, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
You listen and you facilitate, so what do we all want to do, and I luckily had a fair amount of experience in like leftist organizations and communities when I was in college, where we use consensus-based decision making. It's not a democracy. It's not a majority. We all have to agree. That's very difficult, but it's important.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So your communication is just,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, at this point. And then working with different types of individuals, that is a gift. So how did you find your higher calling working in the adult space, and what ultimately led you to where you are now in terms of finding a bigger purpose? So, many of us, I think, it sounds like you and I kind of started in the industry around the same time. And as the seasons go on, I think we can sometimes have tunnel vision, and then you can start reflecting on, your purpose and why am I here? And so what did that look like for you? How did you decide, I want to go beyond, being either in front of or behind the camera and do something that impacts my community?
So pivoting more towards directing, producing has been really lovely, because I feel like it's been this like place of praxis, right? I can go lobby or testify at committee hearings when it comes to policy and legislation, and try to keep my community safe through those methods. But there's also like the boots on the ground of, okay, is this a safe physical space that these performers are in today? Like,
Ah,
if a police officer shows up at our door, what is the plan? I am the person that they have to go through.
mhm.
Are there enough baby wipes and Pedialyte on set to make sure this person can be clean and hydrated? That's where the rubber meets the road, and I think that it's very dangerous when you get into the nonprofit space, where there's all of this funding and donors and things,
Gotcha.
that we can forget what we're freaking doing here, which
Mhm.
is serving a marginalized population that needs our support and needs access to resources and safety. Bottom line. And so being able to do that on the ground as a director producer, to be like the person negotiating safety and working conditions through a corporation and community, right?
Yeah.
That's been great. And that's really, I've actually realized yesterday that I have been doing directing, producing as long or longer than the whole time I did my like chapter of nonprofit and advocacy work. That was about like 3.5, 4 years. And I'm just about to hit my 4th year of directing, producing full time. But I will say that as we head into this like very intense month of the the 2024 general election, I'm feeling the call to have my attention elsewhere. As much as I love being on set and I am committed to the work that I do there and the things that we create together there. And I love my team. I know that I have to kind of divide my attention for the next, 43 days, I
Yeah.
believe. And ultimately, I know that while I love porn, while I love directing and producing, advocacy, changing the world for the better, it is my calling. I do want to see a world where we have decriminalization in the United States for sex work. That is something I do want to see before I pass on to whatever is next. So I know I'm going to keep staying in this space. I've thought of running for office many times. But again, like I said, kind of off the cuff, until Citizens United is repealed and we don't have the excessive money that we have in politics, like I can't feel good about raising several $1,000,000 to like put me in a government job. That's not, I can't. I just can't, especially when we have the houselessness population in such need, like literally 2 blocks from my house. I can't be raising money for a campaign that is a candidacy, that just
Yeah.
seems insane to me. But I know that this is where I want to be in terms of the future.
Amazing. Um, so let's switch over to how you're finding your balance then throughout all of this. You have this selection coming up, and you're also currently directing, producing. So how do you manage to find personal time between everything?
Mm. I think that so for years I was a performer and a dancer, right? And so being really grounded in my body is very important. And at the end of the day, like the body keeps the score, and like this corporeal form is in charge in a lot of ways. So my body will, when it's screaming, like when my brain can't brain anymore, I have to let it rest. And so when my body demands rest, I've gone through many seasons in my life where I just didn't listen and went ahead anyway. And I know I can do that if I need to, but I really need to save it for when I really need to. And so offering myself a lot of grace and a lot of time to do nothing. I'm a Gemini, and so like I'm very all over the place. I love stimulation. And I think that allowing myself to not have any stimulation sometimes, to spend an afternoon watching Love is Blind or whatever, like trash TV is currently. My brain loves good information and like documentaries and podcasts and things like that. And so when I actually let it rest by watching something mindless, it's actually a gift.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. It's like you're just like letting it breathe a little bit, and then you can start fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, just letting my body talk to me and like listening to it, going for a walk, doing stretching. I used to be an intense yoga girly. I still practice yoga at home when I have time to like go take a double yoga class and like be in Zen space. I can, but I'm usually not afforded that time. So even taking 5 minutes on my little like rainbow rug in here and like listening to half of a record, there's
Yeah.
I say this in polyamory all the time, but I think it's true of like time as well. If you put boundaries on something, you can have endless depth. So if you're just like, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes to meditate, that 5 minutes can feel eternal, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's over and you move on, but you try to just like fully sink into it when you can.
Yes, do what you can when you can. So that's a nice segue then for your personal philosophy on self-care for advocacy workers and activists. What would you share in terms of self-care advice
Let's
for
see.
these individuals?
You know, oh, this is something I'm personally working on. So this is not a fully formed like policy statement yet, but um, I will often say I'm only going to work so hard to work so hard, and it's very easy, especially in activism spaces, to come up against conflict, right, or resistance. And for me, I have to save my energy for this fight. It's a lot easier, or it's very hard to decriminalize sex work in the United States, to win an election, to change people's minds, all these things that we go up against, very difficult, right? And I think that in a lot of spaces, people can want an easy win so bad that they opt for an easy win because it's very easy to say, hey, I don't want that person in this space and feel like that's a win. Hey, I want this person to do it this way, not this way. And they feel like that's a win. And that's when our communities start to like, so no cops, right? We can't be copping at each other either. We can't operate from this like carceral space of trying to get people and one up each other and be competitive. That's not what these spaces are for.
Yeah.
And one of my mentors, Annie Sprinkle, who has been in activism space also since she was a child. She came from people who like fought during the civil rights movement. And she said to me once when I was having like a crisis of faith around organizing and in these spaces, she's like, Siouxsie, never forget. This sounds paranoid, but never forget like the government does actually have bad actors in spaces, right? We know this. We've seen files there. You know, it happened during the civil rights movement. It happened during the Iraq War. We can assume it's happening now, and it may be happening in our community. So when you encounter people or spaces where there's always resistance, where there's always someone who is bringing up a way to make it more complicated so that we don't get to our outcome, just find a way to go around. Don't keep butting your head up against resistance because you don't know if that's a bad actor. It very well might be, whether it's intentional or part of a larger scheme or not.
Yeah.
You can't waste your fight on the small fights. You can only fight so hard to fight so hard. So find another space. You know, if you're coming up against resistance because of interpersonal issues or whatever, there's another space that needs you there. It does, you know, because sex work is such an intersectional space. If you're working in homelessness advocacy, there are sex workers that need you. If you are working in incarcerated spaces with incarcerated people, there are sex workers there that need you. It touches everything. So don't get bogged down if you hit a dead end or you get mired in the muck. Find another place for you to use your voice and be effective.
Yeah.
I wish
That's
someone had told me that.
super sound advice. And I feel like that's only something that can come through lived experiences. So especially if Annie Sprinkle is telling you, you know, this is just, you take the advice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I remember
Yeah.
like hearing at the time, like, oh, Annie, I know. But then like a couple years ago, I'm like, fuck.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. After you've kind of worn yourself out a bit too, just, you know, yeah. Okay. So final question for you.
Oh, wow.
So what are some things that we can do, our community members can do to further the efforts to destigmatize sex work?
Ooh. So I think that people who use our services, so our clients, our fans, our supporters, are often situated in a space where they have more access to spaces where they're not going to have that stigma. Their face is not on the internet
Yeah.
next to dot triple X for all time. And so reaching out to the people who, you know, patronize us and say, hey, you please talk about these issues in your community. When someone perpetuates sex worker stigma via a joke, via an offhanded comment at a party, call them out on it. If you can, if you're safe, and the likelihood that you, sir, are safe, or at least safer than I may be, is high. So in imploring and encouraging the people who support us financially to use their privilege within their own communities to support us, you know, with their words, with their actions, with their votes,
Mm.
is very important. And so as, you know, especially someone who is in the webcam space and is, you know, interacting with thousands of people, you have such an opportunity to use your voice to create change. And so never underestimate that. The followers that you have, the people you engage with, the folks who watch you, they will listen to you. You have a magic spell. You are doing literal magic. And so using that voice to change the world it's innate. It's in you already. So don't be afraid to use it.
Amazing. Siouxsie Q, thank you so much. And by the way, if you guys enjoyed this, please be sure to look out for our Q&A with Siouxsie that will discuss everything, the election on November 5th, as well as how policy and politics pertains to sex work. So that is coming up. Siouxsie, thank you again. And where can people find you if they want to follow you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Ah, thank you so much. Youramericansweetheart.com will get you to all of my safe for work links and also to the not safe for work stuff through one of those surreptitiously placed. And also please check out hot2vote.com for all of the things political moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Siouxsie.